Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Berkeley Music Education and Special Needs Study Group, Level 2, Session 1. I anticipate that some of you may have been with me earlier today for Level 1. Some of you have not. We also have, of course, people who will be participating asynchronously, and this session is being recorded. I should tell you now, too, that you will receive the slides sent to you over email. Along with the session recording early next week, probably on Monday. It takes a while for recordings of this length to be processed by Zoom, but I will get them out to you on Monday, unless there's some unanticipated delay with the processing. So you don't need to worry about snapping screenshots of slides or writing everything down. You know, we can keep it easy. We are delighted that you are here today. This is our 6th year offering the Music Education and Special Needs Study Group. We change up the curriculum every year. There are some things that stay and lots of things that move around, and we're super excited about this year's offering. We will talk about all of the logistics around the study group at the end today, and I'm doing that purposely because there are people who will be joining us late. So I want to get the information out, but we'll do it all at the end. So we'll get your questions answered. You'll get all the information, no worries. But let's first proceed with the content for today's session. We are going to be talking about neurodiversity and models of disability. So our agenda is as follows. I'll be introducing you a little bit to me and then to my work at the Berkeley Institute for Arts Education and Special Needs. And then we will get deep into the concept of neurodiversity, its origin, the principles of it, terms and definitions related to it, implications for educators and for society. And we will also look at models of disability, and we'll specifically look at the medical model, the social model, the affirmative model, and their implications for educators and society. There will be time for question and answer and discussion, and then we will transition to some time on logistics and time for questions and answers on that. I will program in at least 2, probably about 2 stretch breaks for us because we need them. So I'll make sure that we get a few minutes to step away from the computer, staying in the Zoom webinar, but step away for a few minutes just to stretch or whatever, and take a break as well as we go. So a little bit about me. I am a singer and a pianist. I specialize in Jewish music and jazz music. The Jewish music I sing is in Yiddish and Hebrew. I am an educator with experience at all levels and in all settings. Arts advocacy is a big part of my work and my mission. And, you know, everybody needs to find their superpower. My superpower is founding and directing programs of all sizes, whether that's a class, a couple of sessions, workshops, or academic curriculum, or academic programs, or I co-founded a school, other institutional founding that I've done, creating partnership programs. That's really my sweet spot, is creating and running programs and leading them. I've done a large amount of peer-reviewed research that I publish and that I present on regularly. Scholarship is a big part of what I do as well. I got into this work with arts education for people with disabilities in a bit of an unusual path. Many people, I would say the majority of people who work in this space, got here through direct experience with a person with disabilities. It could be a family experience, a personal experience, a professional experience. And while now I know many people with disabilities and have lots of relationships with them of all different kinds, that's not what really drove me here. What drove me here is access to the arts and arts education. And that dedication to that and commitment to that goes way back to when I was entering high school. And I call myself a Proposition 2.5 survivor. So what that means is in the United States, education and many other public services and enterprises are funded in large respect through property taxes. So the property taxes that are collected in a community go towards funding that thing. And public education is one of those things. And that's how it was proposed initially by Thomas Jefferson and his colleagues. And that's how it continues today. In the late 1970s, in the United States, there was a very strong anti-tax sentiment. There were a lot of economic struggles, and there was a lot of push against taxes and push to lower taxes. And starting with California, who passed Proposition 13, there were laws passed around the country in various states around taxes. And Massachusetts' version was called Proposition 2.5, which went into effect in 1980. And it is a law that stands on the books today. And what Propositions 2.5 states, it has a few components, but the primary component that is relevant here is that from one year to the next, the increase in any community's property tax, so there's more than 300 cities and towns in Massachusetts, in any one of them, the increase in property tax from one year to the next cannot be more than 2.5%. When this went into effect, what ended up happening was that cities and towns ended up having to make severe cuts to different aspects of things that they offered. I lived more than 2 miles from the high school, and my school bus was cut. In the high school, the arts were significantly cut and to a great deal eliminated. Foreign languages cut, library in school was cut, town services were cut, garbage collection was scaled way back, the town library was scaled way back, lots and lots of things. So my arts program that I was so excited to join, I had been very, very active as a singer and a pianist, and I was excited about drama and all sorts of things. It was a strong arts program in my high school before this all happened. There was nothing for me when I started high school. And I immediately joined with my friends and did all sorts of advocacy work, petitioning, performing at school committee meetings, at town council meetings, at the State House, at town meeting center, all these different things to advocate for access to our arts education, which had been taken from us. And by the time I left high school, a fair amount had been reinstated, but not entirely. Certainly now, it's been many, many years, things have been reinstated. But I experienced firsthand what it was like to have an arts education and then have it taken away. And that really has been the breeding ground for my dedication to opportunities for arts education for everyone as an advocate. I founded with 3 other people a school called the Conservatory Lab Charter School. It's a K-8 school that still exists in Boston, where music takes place at the same amount of time in the schedule as every other subject. So they get music every day. And it's pretty amazing. And I was a co-founder and worked there for the first 5 years of the school as one of the school's leaders. In 2004, when I completed my doctoral work at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, I started at Boston Conservatory as chair of the music education department. And my job was to create and run graduate programs to train people to be music teachers in public schools and elsewhere. And as part of that work, I initiated partnerships all over the Boston area to get my graduate students hands-on experience teaching. So they went into hospitals and homeless shelters and arts organizations and community organizations. And we also partnered with a school that was very close by that was only for students with disabilities. And my students would go in 1 day a week and give a series of classroom general music lessons to the whole school. That partnership was so effective that they ended up hiring one of my students when she graduated, and she still works there as their music teacher, which is pretty awesome. A lot of that initial work led to the development of what was at the time called the Boston Conservatory Program for Students on the Autism Spectrum. It was a private music lessons program, lessons taught by my graduate students just for people with autism. That grew and grew and grew and expanded in all kinds of cool ways. And then in 2016, Boston Conservatory and Berklee College of Music legally merged. That led to a planning year. And then in 2017, we created the Berkeley Institute for Arts Education and Special Needs, and I'm the founding managing director. In addition, my advocacy work continues. I am the immediate past chair of the Arts Education Advisory Council for Americans for the Arts, and I continue to work on their Speakers Bureau, training other people to be arts advocates. So that's an introduction to who I am. The Berkeley Institute for Arts Education and Special Needs is a catalyst for the inclusion of people with disabilities in all aspects of visual and performing arts education. It was launched in September 2017 and stems from more than 10 years of work at Boston Conservatory. And there are three main areas of our work: arts education programs, direct service programs for the community, graduate and undergraduate courses and programs, and professional development. And I'll talk a little bit more about each of these. But before I do, here is a short video to introduce you to our work. There are hundreds of thousands of people with disabilities. Hold everything. I need to redo the share. I don't think I have optimized audio. I'm going to redo the share. One sec. Yeah, I had not optimized audio. Good thing. Okay. Good. Here we go. Who love the arts and who need to be seen and heard and nurtured and accepted. We believe that arts education opportunities are super important for everybody in their lives.
We've worked with many students that have sung for the first time in our class, have spoken for the first time in our class, have taken first steps in our class. It's been a really rock star journey, I'm not gonna lie.
I have had kids in this class who can't say a word to me, but as soon as the hello song starts, they are matching pitch, they're inserting kids' names that they know. How can I meet those kids where they are? By trying to enter their realm.
As parents of a kid with special needs, it's always this stress that they're going to be able to be independent, that they're going to be able to survive. To see that transform in what we see when he's performing, it's like, this is it. This is what really makes him a person.
When we began our work in 2007, we launched just private music lessons with individuals with disabilities, with autism, studying with graduate students from Boston Conservatory who received a lot of training and support. That led to first of their kind graduate programs in music education and autism.
My graduate students have skills that I've never seen in music educators before. They have the ability to create an education in a world for students with special needs and autism that is cutting edge.
By creating an institute, the Berkeley Institute for Arts Education and Special Needs, it allows us to expand our programs beyond autism to other disabilities, and also to expand our work beyond music to other art forms.
It's been demonstrated scientifically that the arts are good for people. The arts help people do whatever it is they do better. The Institute is a fantastic addition to the work that we do.
This institute is demonstrating that people on the autism spectrum and with other special needs can learn. In doing so, we're often finding unexpected talent.
When Teresa started, she was 9 years old. She wouldn't speak very much. She could play very basic piano melodies, but she had perfect pitch. And now, to see her as a teenager, she'll speak to me in complete sentences, she can answer direct questions, and she's able to make eye contact, huge social development.
And no matter how slow the progress is, they keep on believing in the value of that person, regardless of whether they have autism or whatever.
Teaching students on the spectrum is challenging in its own way, but it is so rewarding. Even though they may not pursue it as a career when they get older, I feel like I'm sparking a bit more passion.
I like to sing and act because it's my passion, especially in the recitals.
I still see my son, and then all of a sudden, he's ready for the performance, and then it's like a transformation. He's another person. He doesn't miss a cue, he doesn't miss a note. This is what really drives him.
The arts are an indispensable part of everyone's life. We want participation, we want exposure, we want experience. Berkeley provides us with the opportunity to be all of those things in the local, national, and international communities.
I would recommend this program to anyone, even if you don't think that they have a love for the arts. Maybe that's what you need to do as a first step to find out.
You love music, you love the arts, come here. We will embrace you and we will celebrate what you can do. That's a little bit of an introduction. This is a list of our arts education programs. I think it's 13 music programs, 2 adaptive dance programs, and a theater program. I'm not going to go through every single thing that we have here, but things that are a little bit unusual. We start at age 3 with our music class for young children, and we have people all the way up to age 93. So we work with people of all ages and all disability populations. So Introduction to Musical Instruments is a class you may not know about. It's a way that students get experience with all of the different instruments. They learn how to play recorder and they learn a little bit of music reading. And this is sort of a bridge between our music class for young children and our private lessons program. We give over 100 private lessons a week. We have about 250 people that participate in these programs every week. The Inner Harmony Ensemble is a chorus of people with disabilities. The iPad Ensemble is a chance to perform, compose, and experiment with music using iPads. So all of the technical aspects of playing music, the fine motor skills, the breath control, the muscle stuff is off the table. And if you have one finger, you can play the iPad in the iPad Ensemble. A rock band is what you would imagine. Music technology class is students working with Ableton Live, and GarageBand and Logic at a pretty high level to compose, arrange, and manipulate music. Music history is what you would expect. We are going to be starting ear training and music theory very soon. Our Nurturing Leaders program is a career development program, a career readiness program for selected students who participate in our programs, where they get career readiness training, mentoring, and paid internships at our institute in various roles. That's been extremely successful. We have a permanent virtual arm. So we started, of course, with everything was in person. The pandemic hit, everything went remote. Now we are gradually bringing back in person and keeping remote forever. So we now serve people all over the world in our programs. We have 2 adaptive dance programs that go under the name Step by Step. The Able Day Session Summer Music Program is a week-long summer music day camp. It happens the last week of July, and there's another session the first week of August. Our theater program, which is called Daytime Moon Creations, is a student-devised theater program where they create the theater pieces and do a lot of improvisation. So that gives you an idea of what we do. Most of it is on Saturdays, except the Able Day sessions, which is Monday through Friday for just those 2 weeks. The graduate programs that we offer are the only programs of their kind in the world. I created them and they started in 2014. We offer a Master of Music and Music Education with a concentration in music and autism, and a graduate certificate in music education and autism. They are designed for working teachers so that classes are in the summers or in the evenings during the academic year. We do offer distance learning opportunities where you synchronously Zoom into classes. So it's not online education, it's not asynchronous. It is required that you are synchronous. And yes, we have people in Singapore at 4:30 in the morning. Oh boy, they do it, which is amazing. And the programs take about 2 years. And I should say one other thing. The teaching staff for our direct service arts education programs is made up of current students and alumni from these programs. So all of our direct service teachers have been trained through these programs. And then we do a whole lot of different professional development activities. We just had our annual conference, which always happens in April. We have an annual symposium. I have requested the space for the date and I haven't heard yet, so it is date TBA. We have study groups like this. We've been doing this particular study group for 6 years. We have other study groups that we do with school districts and with other organizations. We have a digital learning series of free video recordings of sessions that are posted on our website, workshops, 20-minute workshops, all art forms, all disability populations. We have a searchable arts resource center for educators where you can go in and put in keywords and pull up lesson plans and assessments and resources and articles and books and web pages that relate to a particular topic. We have a podcast that will be launching this spring. It is called Able Voices, and it's about arts education for people with disabilities. And Able Voices is guest hosted by artists with disabilities. I'm very excited about that. We have a bunch of episodes in the can, and we're waiting for a couple more before we start releasing them. We convene 2 leadership networks, one in North America and one that's international, and they are to move the field forward and to engage in research and projects that do that. We do a lot of conference presentations of different kinds. I do a lot of keynoting, but also regular presentations and workshops. My team does a lot of workshops. We consult, we offer mini courses, everything that we can do to help arts educators better prepare for teaching every student. The other thing that's worth mentioning is that our institute deals with all disability populations. Our academic focus at Berkeley is on autism spectrum disorder. That's our academic specialty, but we work with all populations, and what we do applies across the board. So that's an introduction to me and the work. Let's get to our work for today. And we're going to start with an activity. So you can use your computer, you can use a phone or a tablet, you can use paper and pencil and go analog. Take a moment to jot down what you already know about neurodiversity. So I'm going to give us 3 minutes to do that. So stay here in the Zoom room and write. You have 3 minutes. I am going to stand up. I will be here. I'm in this room. I'm going to stand up for a minute just to stretch, and I'll be back in 3 minutes for sure. One more minute, we will be coming back. Do not worry, these are not being collected. This is just a way for us to, our own KWL, right? This is the K. What do we already know? What do we already know about neurodiversity? In case you're not familiar with KWLs, it's what do you know, what do you want to learn, and then what have you learned? We're going to just do the K and the L, because I assume you're here because you want to learn. So another minute. And I apologize that I'm going to be picking up a very needy cat. Many of you know I was presenting for 3 hours earlier today. So I've been sitting at this computer for a lot of time, and she is not understanding why she can't have attention. So we're going to multitask a tiny bit. Okay. So hold those thoughts and we'll come back to them. Neurodiversity is not a completely unfamiliar term in the world today, which is wonderful, but I'm curious how that's going to change. So the origin of the term neurodiversity comes from Judy Singer, and we're going to talk a little bit about her and her work. In her master's thesis, which was then later published as a small book, she wrote quite a bit in the author's introduction, and I have to apologize for the amount of text on these slides. They're from a different context where a lot of text matters. I would rather not have so much text, and we won't be using all of it. But she took her master's thesis and published it as a book chapter, which you can also get as a small book. And the chapter is called, "Why Can't You Be Normal for Once in Your Life? From a quote unquote problem with no name to the emergence of a new category of difference." So what Judy Singer is proposing is that neurologically different should be a category, like we have class, gender, race, and etc. Neurologically different should be another category. And she says this, she's trying to get at a postmodern perspective. She says, and I quote, "The rise of neurodiversity takes postmodern fragmentation one step further. Just as the postmodern era sees every once too solid belief melt into air, even our most taken for granted assumptions that we all more or less see, feel, touch, hear, smell, and sort information in the same way, unless visibly disabled, are being dissolved." So she's saying that we have to stop assuming that everybody takes in through their senses and understands and sorts information in pretty much the same way. That's not true. And that's why she sees it as a postmodern phenomenon. To continue here, she talks about it in terms of being a civil rights movement, because neurodivergent individuals had been marginalized as eccentrics and social outcasts. And because that marginalization had taken place, they were starting to fight back against their exclusion in what she considers to be a neurodiversity movement. That being neurodivergent is a hardwired neurological difference biologically, physically in our brains. It is not a personality flaw that is the person's fault. And that really, and we'll talk about this, had been the perspective for a long time. Similarly, it is not a psychological problem caused by bad parenting. Believe it or not, this is what people thought about neurodivergent disabilities and diagnoses. So there's a long history, for example, that reputable researchers and scholars and medical professionals for decades attributed autism to quote unquote refrigerator mothers and bad parenting. Now, the refrigerator mother concept is the idea that women were somehow poor mothers, and therefore that's what made a child autistic. It's also, of course, a backlash to the role of women in society, the role of women in the workforce, right? So there's a lot going on with that concept. And if you read Steve Silberman's book, Neurotribes, you can read a lot about this history, and it's astonishing and fascinating. So the idea that neurodivergence was a psychological problem caused by bad parenting and or a personality flaw that was the fault of the individual, both of those perspectives were really strong and were currents that were very strong that the neurodiversity movement is fighting against. So previously there had been physical, intellectual, and psychiatric categories of disability. And so back in the day when Judy Singer wrote this book, the phrase high functioning autism was a phrase in vogue. Many of you may know now that we don't use terms like functioning to describe autism or anything with a person. It is not acceptable. Now, instead of saying high functioning autism, you would say someone has low support needs. That's the equivalent. We talk about support needs. We don't talk about levels of functioning, because levels of functioning have a valence of judgment and hierarchy. Now, the support needs phrase is not perfect, and words are a challenge across the board, as we will talk about even more today. But that, just so you know, that phrase is not in vogue anymore. But autism or high functioning autism at the time did not fit any of those three categories. It had been thought of as a psychiatric disability for decades, but that's not accurate. So Singer was proposing an idea of disabilities of social communication as a new fourth category, so that there would be physical, intellectual, psychiatric, and social communication. That has not come to pass, but that's what she proposed in her text. Why did she care about this, write about this, research it? It comes from her personal history. As you're well aware, many researchers have a personal connection to what they research. Her mother, Singer's mother, had high functioning autism, but Singer did not understand that when she was a child. And Singer's own daughter did not develop normally and was developed with autism. And then Singer herself, although she's never been diagnosed, recognizes many of those traits in herself. As she became more and more aware of all of this, she joined a bunch of online discussion groups as a support system. And that was great because this is way before social media. And it's a time when people who were feeling isolated had a way to come together and connect. This is Singer's statement about what she was trying to do in her master's thesis. What I was trying to do in my thesis was to give myself plenty of space to, quote unquote, push the envelope by putting the most positive spin I could on high functioning autism. I wanted to see a neurodiversity revolution as potent as the feminist revolution had been. I wanted to see if, given a more understanding, inclusive, and supportive environment, whether a new type of human capable of rising to a new level of human creativity would evolve. And I was thinking of the difficulties I experienced as a child, as a daughter, and as a mother. Could our lives have turned out differently in a more enabling environment? There's a lot here. First is about a more positive spin on high functioning autism. Second is about a revolution. And third is about making changes to society. If our environment had been more enabling, could our lives have turned out differently? Fascinating. She created her own online support group for people who had been raised by one or more parents with autism. And it became quite a large group. And it was something that was a really strong sense of support for her. So she talks about neurodiversity as a new category. Quote, as new identities, alliances, and movements form and reform themselves, there are signs everywhere that we are beginning to divide ourselves, not only along the familiar lines of ethnicity, my goodness, class, gender, and disability, but according to something new, differences in quote unquote kinds of minds. So she's really trying to create that new category. I love the last quote on here. Try to imagine the kind of society in which NTs, which are neurotypical people, and autistics can interact in mutual respect for each other's differences, gifts, and deficits, where communications protocols have been worked out between what are almost different ontological languages, different worlds of body language and expression. That's the challenge that the new social movements of autistics and cousins, which is another one of those groups, those online support groups, has begun to address, trying to break down communication barriers between people with autism and NTs or neurotypical people. I love this slide. This is my favorite slide probably ever that I've ever made. And I will tell you why. This slide demonstrates the importance and the tremendous value of first-person perspectives. So conventional definitions of autism, which have been created by the psychiatric profession and by doctors and primarily by people who do not have autism. Here is the list on the left side of the slide. Lack of empathy, naive, inappropriate, one-sided interaction, little or no ability to form friendships, pedantic, repetitive speech, poor nonverbal communications, intense absorption in specialized subjects, clumsy and ill-coordinated movements and odd postures, unusual prosody, accents, voice control, insistence on sameness, obsessive routines, and absence of an innate theory of mind, that is, a theory of how other minds work. If you look at that list, there's a whole lot of deficit here. Lack of empathy, inappropriate interaction, little or no ability, pedantic, repetitive, poor, clumsy, ill-coordinated, odd, unusual, obsessive, absence, almost every bullet is a negative. And these are what people without autism use when they define autism. If you ask an autistic person what their experience of autism is, Singer reports this, there's a lot of research that reports it, and I myself have done this with hundreds of people on the spectrum, and I get the same result. They will say, and this is Singer's words, a hypersensitivity to sensory stimuli, which necessitates a withdrawal from a world of overwhelming sensation. If you ask a person with autism what it feels like to have autism, they are going to say, my senses are exhausted. Too much input coming at me from all directions, all feeling big and overwhelming and overpowering. I just need to turn it off and get away. So I love that contrast, because nowhere in somebody else's conventional definition do we see that. And yet that is what the experience is when you ask someone from the inside. Similarly, Judy Singer asked people with autism about the theory of mind piece. And they told her, it's not that we don't understand how other minds work. We just don't understand how neurotypical people's minds work. We understand autistic minds. Just like neurotypical people don't understand autistic minds, autistic people don't understand neurotypical minds. The difference is that neurotypical people say, well, someone with autism lacks a theory of mind. They have a theory of mind. They understand the minds of other people with autism much better than people without autism ever will. So two fascinating arguments that take me back to a big point we're going to hear today a lot is how important first-person perspectives are. And we're going to see and hear a bunch of them over the course of our time together. And it's something that at Berkeley in our programs, we are very dedicated to in our academic work. So then Singer talks about looking at disability and ability. We're pulling up a little bit from a variety of critical perspectives. From a capitalism society, right? So how do we integrate people with disabilities into society? How do we maximize their earning power? How do we think of them as a class of consumers? How do we maximize their ability to work and contribute to a capitalistic society? Medicalization, we're going to talk about this later in models of disability, but this drive to classify and medicalize the body is a power dynamic where doctors have power and patients lose their power. And this is extremely problematic for disabled people. And then normalization. There's the concept of the hegemony of normalcy, this idea that there is a normal and that is superior, and that everything that is not normal must be made to be normal, or wants to be normal, or is lesser than because it's not normal. And again, this has a huge power dynamic that negatively impacts disabled people. Then we hear in the thesis about Singer's childhood. She was sure that her mom had something seriously wrong with her. And if you see this description of what her mom's behavior was like, from my earliest memories of her, my mother confounded some expectation I had of what a human being ought to be like. I was fascinated with the idea that she came from some parallel universe, similar to the one the rest of us inhabited, but tantalizingly, indefinably different. It seemed that the rules of this other universe were somehow simpler, more stereotyped than ours. And when the real world didn't fit this simplified schema, she would lash out, this is her mother, in frustration and rage. She experienced her mother as maddening, intolerable, like a malign force of will, an endless black hole into which all energy was leached from the rest of the family. Her body posture, her voice, her egocentricity, and her inability to sense what others were feeling. She couldn't recognize social cues. She had obsessive routines and high voltage anxiety. She would lash out wildly to her father with anger and frustration. And with Judy, she had, and I quote, an invasive love that seemed not to know anything about me or realize that I had a mind separate from hers. She experienced her mom as relentlessly cruel to her and her father. And Judy exclaimed, "Can't you be normal for once in your life?" Which is where the title for her chapter came from. It never occurred to us that maybe she couldn't. And then Judy had her own child. And by 2 years old, that child was not developing normally. And Judy feared that it was autism. And eventually the daughter was diagnosed. This allowed Judy to re-examine her own relationship with her mother through the lens of autism. And she self-diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. And so she conceives of herself in the middle of 3 generations of women with autism. So the autistic self-advocacy movement is a big part of the revolution that Singer describes in her thesis. And she writes about this as a parallel to the evolution of other movements based on disability or difference, from a social or moral defect. So disability difference starting out as a social or a moral defect in the eyes of the dominant culture, to a disability, to a counter-hegemonic social movement, that evolution. Internet communities play a key role in this with the online resources. And also when there are social challenges, the internet makes that a lot easier. The objectives of the autistic self-advocacy movement that she spells out here are recognition, civil rights and an end to discrimination, and disability services appropriate to their level of functioning on the spectrum. So that gives you, whoops, we are going too fast. That gives you a sense of the origin of the term neurodiversity and the first person perspective that it comes from. How has neurodiversity as a concept continued to evolve? We are going to turn to Thomas Armstrong. I strongly recommend this book, and remember, you will get the slides, so you'll have this. The book is The Power of Neurodiversity: Unleashing the Advantages of Your Differently Wired Brain. This is a book where Armstrong lays out neurodiversity and then its educational implications. It's really interesting stuff. It's beautifully written and very approachable. So he starts the book with a story that I'm going to paraphrase. I'm going to tell my own version of his story rather than reading it to you. Welcome everyone to the land of flowers. In the land of flowers, there is a rose who has a practice as a psychiatrist. One day, a sunflower walks into the rose psychiatrist's office. The rose takes one look at the sunflower and says, "You suffer from excessive height syndrome. Now that I've diagnosed you, I can give you some medication that will help you control your excessive height. You'll never be able to completely correct it, but we can control some of its most troubling characteristics." And the sunflower walks out of the office with a droopy head and very, very sad. The next flower that comes into the rose psychiatrist's office is a cactus. The cactus comes into the office and the psychiatrist says, "You suffer from thorny body syndrome. I think that if you rub this ointment on your thorns, they will be a little bit less sharp, but we can't eradicate the thorns altogether." And the poor cactus walks out feeling despondent. You get the idea. We live in a world where diagnosis and labeling play a very dominant role, and where the power differential from he or she who diagnoses to the patient is quite large, and where people are left helpless for that. And also where the hegemony of normalcy is so strong that difference is not valued. You have a difference, we need to change it. We need to make you more quote unquote normal. We need to make you like everybody else. We need to alleviate the negative effects. Neurodiversity is a very different perspective. In Temple Grandin's words, it's about different, not less. I love that phrase. And if you are not familiar with the work of Temple Grandin, I recommend all of her books, and the HBO biopic that's available on HBO Max starring Claire Danes is extraordinary. Different, not less. When can different just be different? That is the neurodiversity perspective. We look at difference as natural variability. We are naturally all variable. Every single one of our brains is different. There is no one average normal brain. Every single one of our brains is different. And that variability is something to be celebrated, not to be extinguished. There are individual advantages to that variability. And over time, as a human race, there are evolutionary advantages to that variability. And then there's the concept of niche construction, which is about finding ways to adapt your environment and to choose endeavors for which your brain is particularly well suited, so that there's a synergy. You construct your niche, right? So Armstrong puts together beautifully 8 principles of neurodiversity, and it's worth going through these because I think they are extremely helpful in underscoring what neurodiversity is. The first is that the human brain works more like an ecosystem than a machine. The cognitive psychologists back in the 80s and 90s in particular used to compare a brain to a computer. It's not a computer. That's too linear. It's an ecosystem. There are neural pathways that are being grown. There is neuroplasticity. There are neural pathways that are less used, that are being retired. There are changes that are happening. It is an ever-evolving, dynamic ecosystem. And number 2, human beings and human brains exist along continuums of competence, right? There's all different continuums of competence. Each person has many, many, many ways that their brain functions on different continuums of competence. I'm a super detail-oriented person. Some people are more big picture conceptual. We exist differently on those continua of competence, and that's great, right? Human competence is defined by the values of the culture to which you belong. This is a great one, and he tells a story that I'm going to paraphrase about this. So there was a professor who was taking a trip far away, and he was going to have to go on a riverboat in a very rural part of a faraway land. He had many suitcases full of books that he had brought with him. So he brings those into the boat, and there's a boatman who is taking him in the boat. And the professor starts talking to the boatman and about books and about concepts, and the boatman doesn't understand what he's talking about. And the professor says, "You haven't been reading? There's so many wonderful things to read." And the boatman says, I don't read. Reading is not important to me. And the professor says, "That's really unfortunate. You're missing out on a whole world." And then a horrible storm comes up, and they have to lighten the load of the boat, and some of those suitcases have to be dumped over the side. And the boatman says, "We're going to have to abandon this boat and swim." And the professor says, "I don't know how to swim. I never learned how to swim." And the boatman says, "Well, you're going to miss the chance to survive this storm because we're going to have to swim. We're going to lose the boat." So the idea here, of course, is that in the culture to which the boatman belongs, competence is defined by being able to swim and being able to navigate, right? And other skills and attributes. In the culture to which the professor belongs, competence is defined by how much you've read. And he was no longer competent when he was in the boatman's culture, right? So that's about competence. Whether you're regarded as disabled or gifted depends largely on when and where you were born. Again, it is contextual. Disability is contextually defined. Gifted is contextually defined. And unfortunately, as I pick up a cat, those contexts often put forth a definition of normal in order to do that. Success in life is based on adapting one's brain to the needs of the surrounding environment, and then the niche construction. Success in life also depends on modifying your surrounding environment to fit the needs of your unique brain. So we'll start at first. When people choose careers, we choose them based on, we hope, on what we love to do and what feels comfortable and where we are optimized, right? I'm an extrovert. Doing what we're doing today feels really good to me. Somebody else, not so much, right? And they would want a different kind of work where they're not giving public presentations, right? So that's one piece. And then it's finding the right niche for yourself, but it's also, if you're in a particular environment, you need to adapt your brain to that environment's needs. So I, many years ago now, vacationed in Venice. I don't know how many of you have been there, but it's been a phenomenally beautiful city. My friend and I vacationed there, and we stayed in a lovely boutique hotel on a side street off of St. Mark's Square, which was great. It was very convenient, but we always got lost going home. We could never find our way because there were all these side streets off of the square, and they all had little different ways that they looked interesting. And we didn't speak Italian, and we kept getting lost and lost and lost. It took us several days to get good at finding directions. And this was before GPS in our phones and all of that. We were joking that someone could make a lot of money selling directions on the street corner. In order for us to adapt our brains, which are not good at directions and spatial relations, my friend and I, we had to draw maps and use them. The maps we had weren't good enough. We had to draw maps and use them. So we had to adapt our brains, which don't easily find our way home, with tools so that we could meet the needs of the environment and get back to our hotel. Niche construction, I've jumped down to because we talked about those two, includes career and lifestyle choices, assistive technologies, human resources, and other life-enhancing strategies tailored to the specific needs of a neurodivergent individual. So that's again about how you modify the environment by making choices, by using technology, by engaging other resources and other strategies. Positive niche construction directly modifies your brain, which in turn enhances its ability to adapt to the environment. We get this wonderful feedback loop in the neuroplasticity of our brains. I love this slide because I think those principles are super important. This graphic is a little simplified, as most graphics are, but I think it's worth showing here. Neurodiversity, it says in the center, evolution has created specialist thinkers to bring a variety of expertise to humanity. I love that word. Instead of saying difference, specialist thinkers. And then each of these diagnoses are listed with some of the particular expertise that they bring. And we don't want to overgeneralize here. All people with a certain diagnosis are not all the same, but if you look at, for example, ADHD in the bottom right corner, some of the strengths and expertise that some people with ADHD may bring: creative ability, novel thinking, 3D mechanical ability, energy and passion. Go to the other side, autism spectrum disorder, concentration, fine detail processing, sequencing. Go to the top right, dyslexia, visual thinking, creative ability, intuition, 3D mechanical ability. And then there's dyspraxia, Tourette's, dyscalculia. We could go on and on. So this is an important place to stop and make a significant statement, which is this. And Armstrong makes this beautifully in the book. The neurodiversity perspective is absolutely not to say that a disability or diagnosis does not have challenges. We are not trying to gloss over very real challenges that some neurodivergent disabilities and diagnoses create for individuals, and that people work hard to develop strategies, and that it's not easy. It can be challenging. We are not saying that we are all singing Kumbaya and sitting in a circle and everything's easy breezy. No. So we're not negating the challenges, but we are saying there are strengths. There are specialist thinkers. There is an evolutionary purpose for this. We need humans with fine detail processing in our human race. We need humans with creative ability and novel thinking in our human race. And those differences are not less. That's the point. So here's a summary of where we've been so far. Neurodiversity was coined by Judy Singer. Brain differences are to be expected. There is no such thing as an average or normal brain. Brain differences are not deficits. Brain differences often bring strengths to the individual, and brain differences often bring advantages for the society and the human race. Here is a wonderful video that summarizes neurodiversity beautifully.
Neurological differences like autism or ADHD are considered to be dysfunctional disorders and disabilities under the medical model of mental health. There's too little attention given to enabling people with neurologically different minds to be accepted for themselves, to discover and celebrate their strengths, and to find a place in society that values their differences. When most of us think of diversity, we think of things like race or sexual orientation, but there's a different kind of diversity you might not know about, neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is the concept that neurological differences among people should be recognized and respected. I believe it's time for this new social movement, the neurodiversity movement, to take off. Neurodiversity is a part of our genetics and of our evolution as a species. The genes for autism and ADHD are not errors, but rather are the result of variations in the human genome that have and will continue to have advantages for society. One of the genes associated with ADHD, the DRD4 gene, is known as the novelty-seeking gene. It arrived on the human evolutionary scene over 10,000 years ago. Genes associated with autism also go back more than 10,000 years. Research suggests that genetic variants linked to autism might have been positively selected during human evolution because they contributed to exceptional memory skills, heightened perception in vision, taste, and smell, a precise eye for detail, and an enhanced understanding of systems such as animal behavior. These characteristics likely remain in the gene pool today because they are still advantageous. As a psychologist advising the parents of differently wired kids, I tell parents they have a choice between trying to change the child to fit the environment and changing the environment to fit the child. There are many different microhabitats and subcultures in our world. For an individual with autism or ADHD, finding success on their own terms may come from discovering the particular niche that fits best, the niche that allows their strengths to shine and their challenges to be minimized. Individuals with ADHD tend to thrive in situations of rapid change, variety, and that reward creativity and out-of-the-box thinking. A career as a comedian, detective, entrepreneur, journalist, actor, EMT technician, or photographer could be. I'm not saying that having autism or ADHD is easy. And I don't mean to downplay the real suffering that can be caused by having a neurodevelopmental condition, disability, or difference. But it's also time the world sees the beauty and value in brain differences. Neurodiversity might be every bit as crucial for the human race as biodiversity is for life in general. My vision is for a neurodiversity tolerant and accepting society where differences are celebrated for the depth and dimension they bring to the human condition. I want children whose brains are wired differently to be encouraged to find their niche instead of changing to fit other people's ideas of normal. Diversity in every sense makes our world a better place, and people who think differently are a huge part of that.
It reinforces a lot of the themes that we just discussed, including niche construction. This is a good moment for our first break. So I think we should do 5 minutes. So I will see you back here in 5 minutes. Don't leave the webinar. Keep yourself logged in and here, but we will come back. I have 2:03 in Boston time. We'll come back at 2:08. 5 minutes. Thanks. Okay, we are back. We're now going to transition to models of disability. And while there are many models of disability, we're going to focus on the 3 most salient models of disability. And these are the ways that disability has been conceptualized over time. And there are significant implications for those conceptions of disability on many, many aspects of society, including education. So the medical model of disability was the prevailing traditional view for a very, very long time. And in some aspects of life, still holds true today. And the idea of the medical model of disability is that impairments and chronic illness often pose real difficulties, but they are not the main problem. The problem is located in the individual with the disability. If you look at the drawing to the left on this slide, you see the person who is the problem. being pointed to at the problem. The individual is the problem. This traditional view, which is rooted in medical science, is that disability is caused by a physical, mental, or sensory impairment, that the individual is impaired and is the problem, and that the medical profession should focus on curing or alleviating the effect of the impairment. This carries over into other aspects of life. There are aspects of education that exist with the idea that one should try to cure or alleviate the effect of someone's disability. And the notion that a disability needs to be cured or should be cured, of course, perpetuates significant power dynamics, right? It has that hegemony of normalcy. So normal, whatever that is, non-disabled, is above disabled in the power hierarchy. And of course, those who diagnose and those who treat, for lack of a better word, or engage in interventions are positioned more powerful than the disabled. A second model, which is more recent, late 20th century, is the social model of disability. This states that the disability lives and exists in the barriers between an individual and society. So if you look on the left to the drawing, we have the person, and then we have the barriers between them and society, and that is where the disability lives. And these barriers could include an environment that is inaccessible, so buildings that you can't access, services, language, communication, there are many more. Attitudes that could be barriers, there's prejudice, stereotyping, discrimination. Organizations that do not have flexible procedures and practices. The social model of disability locates the disability in these societal barriers and posits that the elimination of those barriers would eliminate and certainly alleviate disability. If you summarize the medical model is focused on assessment, diagnosis, and treatment. The problem is the individual and their medical problems. It emphasizes what the person cannot do. It is a deficit model. And it is set up with a power imbalance where disabled people can never be equal. And the cure is the normalization of that individual. It's controlled by medical professionals, and it perpetuates the tragedy perspective on disability and impairment, that being disabled or being impaired is a tragedy, which if you ask disabled people, they will not tell you that it is a tragedy. The social model of disability is focused on the barriers within a society, locates the problem of disability in those barriers, and therefore society needs to change. It aims to increase people's power over their own lives and to strive for equity in society, in education, and other aspects of our lives. However, in this model, disability and impairment remain a problem. The problem is located in a different place, but it is still a problem. And the perspective on disability and impairment is still the tragedy perspective. Disability is still, in the words of the phenomenal activist, disabled activist, Stella Young, a bad thing, capital B, capital T. It has the underlying assumption that people with disabilities will not have access to a good quality of life because of these barriers, right? So it's negative, it's a tragedy, and there are barriers. This video gets really into the social model of disability from a first-person perspective.
I always felt being a disabled person was a problem. After learning about social model, it challenged me to look at disability completely differently. I myself was able to gain some confidence and self-esteem.
Social model basically says we are people with impairments, and those impairments clearly have an impact on how we live our lives. But the impairments are not the things which disable us.
I'm disabled by the world around me, and if the world was more accessible, I would be less disabled, and then I would just be left with my impairment, i.e. what doesn't work. It's not that my legs don't work that's disabling me. It's the fact that if I want to, if I'm on a flat surface, I can wheel around fine, I'm wonderfully happy. It's only when I come up to a flight of stairs.
As a wheelchair user, you have a slightly easier job of explaining the social model. Whereas if you're trying to explain the less physical barriers, it's much harder.
There's barriers everywhere in life to do with how we communicate, to do with people's attitudes.
Discovering the social model actually was a massive liberation on another level. Yeah, I was being treated differently, and no, it wasn't me being deficient, it was everybody else's social anxieties that were being projected onto me.
The blame for you not fitting in is no longer on your shoulders.
Suddenly, my disability is out there and not in here. It was what made me realise that I was something beyond the thing that other people thought I was.
It's a real liberating thing, but it also means you can change it. We can say to the world, look, you must put a lift in this building. You must make sure that the signage is readable for people with visual impairments.
If you want that equality to be real, you've really got to then tackle the inequality people are experiencing in schools, in workplaces, with transport.
The main reason that the social model, I think, is important to disabled people is that it allows us to be a community. You achieve a whole lot more as a group.
As long as we as disabled people make sure that our voices are heard and that all those people that support us also have their voices heard, I think we will get there.
I hope that Scope is doing work that will help disabled people to become prouder of who we are, pushing boundaries around who can be included and where.
Come the glorious day, if it ever came, where all the barriers went, we'd just be people with impairments. We wouldn't be disabled people anymore.
Find out more about Scope's work and how to get involved by clicking.
So I think you get a good idea there about how powerful the social model is for people with disabilities. Yet there's another model, and this one is newer. This is a 21st century model, and it is the affirmative model of disability. And there are some interesting changes in this perspective from what we've seen before. The impairment is not the problem, rather learned stereotypes about disability and impairment are the problem. This allows disabled people to take control over their own bodies and lives, and it is a direct challenge to the notion that disabled people want to be cured or should be cured. It challenges the notion of normality and puts forth a positive identity of being disabled. This affirmative model, affirming disability, is often expressed in the disability arts movement through protest and artwork. This is a lot of text, but it's worth reading. The affirmative model of disability does not deny that there may be a negative side to impairment. Rather, it recognizes that impairment is not always undesirable and associated with pain or illness, but can be valuable, exciting, and intrinsically satisfying. That is such an important sentence. I'm going to read it again. The affirmative model of disability recognizes that impairment is not always undesirable and associated with pain or illness, but can be valuable, exciting, and intrinsically satisfying. Swain and French contend that the affirmative model encourages a non-tragic view of disability and impairment, which encompasses positive individual and collective social identities for disabled people. In this model, the experience of impairment over time and in various circumstances is taken into account alongside the experience of living within a disabling society. The affirmative model is not about disabled people celebrating unequal, oppressive social relationships. People who adhere to the affirmative model are frequently protesting and demonstrating, particularly through the disability arts movement, against marginalization and exclusion, excuse me. Rather, the affirmative model is about validating the lives and experiences of people with impairments and enabling them to make sense of themselves as actors in their own cultural worlds. So rather than non-disabled people putting a tragedy and imposing a perspective on disability onto disabled people. It's saying, let's have disabled people have their own say about who they are as actors in their own cultural worlds, and let's validate their lives and experiences, which I think is very, very powerful. Here is a wonderful first-person account of experiences with ADHD that lines up with what we've been discussing.
Cool. Okay. Hi. My name is Steven Zanzi, and I'm a director and a writer, an actor, a drummer, scuba diver, soccer player, a camera operator, an airbrush artist, a physicist, a stargazer, a rock climber, a snowboarder, a model maker, a stage manager, a camp counselor, a PA, a DJ, a club president, a magician, and for a brief stint in May of 2012, I was called upon to repair 2 stopwatches which had stopped working. Who am I, you ask? My name is Stephen Tonti, and I have ADHD. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactive Disorder, and I was first diagnosed with ADHD not by a diagnostician or a private practice or a pediatrician, but by a 2nd grade teacher who was interviewing me for a spot at the school she was working at. Now, you see, my family had just moved from New Orleans, Louisiana to Dallas, Texas, and I was in a search for a new academic home. Now, during this particular interview, this particular teacher received a message ahead of time from my 1st grade teacher back in New Orleans to check me for any signs of ADHD. And just as she reached the series of questions devised to evaluate whether a child between the ages of 5 and 17 is ADHD, wham! I fell out of my chair. No, I didn't slip. And no, the chair didn't crumble beneath me. You see, behind the teacher's desk was this giant window. And through that window was a giant field. And on that field were what appeared to me at the time to be hundreds of thousands of kids my age. And they were all playing with a great, big, inflatable rainbow beach ball. And as they played and moved all around the field, it was all I could do to keep track of them. So I leaned a little bit to the left, and I leaned a little bit to the right, and I leaned a little bit more to the left, and a little bit more to the right before disaster. I still maintain today that window was a trap and I was set up. So I was rejected from middle school because I was an 8-year-old boy who couldn't sit still in his chair. Oh, and there was this complex marshmallow-related incident between myself and some of the staff there. But anyway, I ended up at the Episcopal School of Dallas. And over the next 11 years, I tried everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Extracurriculars. I tried computing, robotics, carpentry, canoeing, rock climbing, poetry club, logic club, poker club, comedy club, and camping. I went camping at least twice a year for 4 years. And band. Oh my God. I tried the trumpet, the saxophone, the piano, the electric bass, the stand-up bass, the guitar, both acoustic, and did I mention I played sports? It was Texas. We played sports. I tried all of them. And the drums. And I even took a short-lived stab at the harp. I played 7 different instruments. Played being a very generous term. When all of a sudden my school built a theater, and I thought, why not? So I started in the shop building sets, and then I moved to the sound booth, and then the light booth, and then my teacher asked me to act, so I played Conrad in Ordinary People. And then I said, can I direct? And she said, go for it. So I directed 12 Angry Jurors, because this is high school, people, and you can't direct 12 Angry Men with a drama school that has 3 boys and 4 girls. Yes, for the people doing the math at home, that's 7 drama students for a show with a 12 in it. And before I knew it, I was auditioning and interviewing at drama schools across the country. And that's when Carnegie Mellon found me. And I love it here. I really do. But moving on. So what? So I have ADHD. And ADHD is misunderstood as an inability to focus. But it's much stranger than that. It's not a lack of focus, period. It's that I have a hard time selecting something and giving it my full attention. Something has to grab my attention, pique my curiosity, and then I can hyper-focus. Now, this is a good thing and a bad thing. It's a bad thing because I have a hard time completing things that don't excite me. And we live in a world where you have to read your textbooks and pay your taxes. And yes, big textbooks with no pictures frighten me. And no one likes handling taxes. Well, actually, some of you might like that. But the upside is, when something does pique my curiosity, I become obsessed and I hyper-focus. I spend a lot of time with film. I can spend upwards of 12 hours in a row editing clips, sometimes until 6:30 in the morning. In the theater, when I have to put a show up, I'll pull 15-hour days for weeks on end, and I enjoy that. I love that. I can read a 500-page novel that I love much faster than a one-page article I don't care for. It's easier for me to see the big picture. As a director, I have to track 20 people with very different jobs, from designers to writers to actors, and I find handling that much easier than finishing that one-page article, which I'm still working on. David Neilman, the founder and CEO of JetBlue, who is also ADHD, mind you, says, I have a hard time doing the mundane things in life. I have an easier time planning a 20-aircraft fleet than I do paying my light bill. Yeah. So, another good thing about ADHD is, because I felt compelled to try everything, I was able to explore all the possible career paths I might not have, and might not have discovered what I truly want to do. So many teens and young adults are expected to focus on one or two fields of study, and one or two hobbies, and hope and pray they like the ones they've chosen, or that have been chosen for them. My job is to tell other people's stories, and I find an easier time doing that when I can draw from all of these other perspectives. It's easier for me to see the world through the eyes of a drummer because I've tried that. It's easier for me to see the world through the eyes of a graphic designer because I've tried that too. ADHD is a difference in cognition, not simply a disorder. We are attention different, not attention deficit. But because...
Okay, I have to stop it there. That is, I think, the crux of the most super important thing that he says right there. We are attention different, not attention deficit. Let's continue.
It is treated and misunderstood as a disorder. It's treated as something that needs fixing. So the idea seems to be that we need to get rid of my ADHD. But there's no getting rid of it. There's just sedating it. I was lucky. My high school teachers were hip, young progressives who were delighted to give me extra time, the additional attention, and the overall freedom to express myself the way that I felt necessary. So many other kids with ADHD aren't as lucky. For example, my roommate. Adam has been my roommate for 4 years. He is an excellent actor in the School of Drama and a brilliant thinker. We both grew up in Dallas, Texas, and we both have ADHD. Adam's high school was different. Now, even though he grew up only 15 minutes north of me, Adam's high school had harsher penalties for falling out of your chair. Now, you see, when you're a kid diagnosed with ADHD, your doctor administers a series of amphetamines, and everybody waits, because no one has a clue how you'll react. You might get more calm. You might become depressed. You might lash out at the people around you. Now, the difference between Adam and me is when a new medication may cause me to act out, my teachers immediately advise my doctors that I change my medication. However, when Adam tried a new medication, his teachers wrote this in his report. Adam is less motivated, less animated, and less involved in class activities, but at least he's quiet now. We need a healthier understanding of people with ADHD, and it starts at home. I had a mother and a father who supported every obsession. I distinctly recall my father asking one day, "Son, you're only 14. What could you possibly want with an air compressor?" To which I responded, "I want to airbrush t-shirts and shorts and sell them to my classmates and friends." All right then. And he would go out and he would get it, and I would play with it, and I would obsess over it. During the summers when I went off my medication and my body was wrecked with the effects of withdrawal, my mother sat by my side, literally coaxing the migraines out of me. With their support, I was able to explore, and my obsessions grew and multiplied, and I was able to maintain my sanity. Schools need to develop a better attitude towards students with ADHD as well, and there are plenty of examples out there. For instance, the Eagle Hill School in Hardwick, Massachusetts. The Eagle Hill School believes that every student can learn, that learning differently requires teaching differently. and that we must educate our kids, our students, to learn about learning in order to form new beliefs in a search for intellectual autonomy. Professors who act more as mentors as opposed to disciplinarians inspire me. When teachers level with me, I feel like I'm more in control, that there's a dialogue regarding new ways of thinking and approaching a problem, focusing, completing tasks. We have to create and develop a healthier relationship with medication. I think that Ritalin, Adderall, Concerta should only be prescribed to someone who can physically handle the effects of these drugs and their withdrawal. 12 is far too young. 16 is still too young. There are so many alternatives to medication. Studies have shown that for some, it's just an added weight or pressure to help them focus. And these things exist. There are weighted pads that help people feel more comfortable so they can complete tasks on time. For some people, it's tics like chewing pencils. So give them rubber-coated pencils. We have to teach kids to teach themselves. It's the best thing that we can do for our kids. And lastly, our society has to embrace cognitive diversity. For example, Specialisterne, or The Specialists, is a Danish organization that trains people with autism and ADHD as consultants in IT and other more technically oriented tasks and jobs. We have to turn this joke around on those who believe that my disorder divides me from my more normal peers. Besides, who here at Carnegie Mellon really qualifies as normal anyway? A great author, a masterful playwright, and a sublime poet once writ. Any guesses as to who I speak of? Shakespeare. Thou art correct. Shakespeare's Sonnet 121. 'Tis better to be vile than vile esteemed, when not to be receives reproach of being, and the just pleasure lost, which is so deemed not by our feelings, but by others' seeing. For why should others' false adulterate eyes give salutation to my sportive blood? Or, on my frailties, why are frailer spies, which in their wills count bad what I think good? Nay, I am that I am. They that level at my abuses reckon up their own. I may be straight, though they themselves be bevel. By their rank thoughts, my deeds must not be shown, unless this general evil they all maintain. All men are bad, and in their badness reign. In Sonnet 121, Shakespeare condemns hypocrisy. He implores us not to let others' false adulterate eyes condemn us for something they believe us to be. He begs you not to let the selfish and negative comments of others hinder the just pleasures owed to you. A hierarchy of frailer spies have asked me to conform to society's means, and I propose the opposite. I propose let society conform to me, and I implore you to do the same. I'll leave you with something that Robin Williams, a poster child for us in the ADHD community, once said. We are all only given a little spark of madness. You mustn't lose it. Thank you.
So I think you can see why that talk hits on so many of the points that we're talking about and why I like it so much. We're going to talk about language. And let me make a note that we're here looking at time. We're good. Okay. So one piece of language is person first language versus identity first language. And there is some disagreement around how best to handle that. Person first language would be person with autism, person who uses a wheelchair, person with hearing loss. And the idea there is that the individual is a person first, and they happen to have a disability. This is the language that organizations tend to use in materials when they are describing a population that they're working with. Then there is identity first language, which is autistic person, wheelchair user, deaf person. And that comes from the perspective that one's disability is such a central part of their identity that they don't want it to be separate. And they're not ashamed of it. They don't want to change it. And this is where the self-advocacy community tends to lie. You hear me, I go back and forth between the two. And I readily do that on purpose. If you're talking with someone, ask them for their preference. A lot of times people start with person first language when in doubt, because it's sort of the path of lesser, offense. People are less offended if you go for person first language first. I'm not sure that's 100% true these days. Try one and ask the person for their preference. But it is important to see that these pieces of language have their own very specific valences and also their own specific values behind them. And I want to pull up for you, if you give me a moment, a particular video that's not on the docket for today, but I think would be really great. So give me a second to get it. This is the magic of having it all on my computer, so I can do this. Take a look at this video about person first versus identity first language.
Why do people say people experiencing homelessness? What's the difference between saying autistic person and saying person with autism? Person-first terminology aims to put someone's personhood before their condition. The ARC, a nonprofit which advocates for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families, says that, quote, by placing the person first, the disability is no longer the primary defining characteristic of an individual, but one of several aspects of the whole person. Even the CDC advocates for using person-first language. The main argument for person-first language is the emphasis of personhood. Instead of saying, that disabled kid, or the mentally ill, which proponents argue dehumanize people with disabilities and/or mental illnesses, we should use their condition as a descriptor, not a definition. The Texas Council for Developmental Disabilities shares this view and writes, what do you call people with disabilities? Friends, neighbors, coworkers, dad, grandma, Joe's sister, my big brother, our cousin, Mrs. Schneider, George, husband, wife, colleague, employee, boss, reporter, driver, dancer, mechanic, lawyer, judge, student, educator, homeowner, renter, man, woman, adult, child, partner, participant, member, voter, citizen, amigo, or any other word you would use for a person. Still, many advocates and self-advocates prefer what's called identity-first language. For them, their condition is part of their identity. It is a definition, not just a descriptor. Kara Leibowitz writes for The Body Is Not an Apology, quote, the idea of separating the disability from the person stems from the idea that disability is something you should want to have separated from you, like a rotten tooth that needs to be pulled out. My friend of 12 years was recently diagnosed with autism. They wished to remain anonymous, but agreed to give a written statement summarizing their opinion of person-first versus identity-first terminology. They write, quote, it doesn't seem like a big deal. I didn't understand why it was a big deal at first, but the idea is sort of this. Person-first language assumes autism is bad. It treats autism as an add-on to who you are, assuming that you would be different, presumably better, without autism, and that the person you would be without autism is the real you. So the reason I, and a lot of people, tend to prefer identity-first language isn't really that it makes a huge semantic difference, but that making the conscious choice to use it, when person-first language might be expected, shows that we feel that we are who we are right now with autism. Sort of that our autism defines us, and that's good and bad at the same time, but we're not less ourselves because we're autistic.
A lot of people who support identity-first language are proponents of the idea that the identities that person-first language tries to separate from basic humanity are too integral to be ignored and not negative attributes. Identity First Autistic celebrates the rich experience that autism brings to the lives of autistic people. Many people who have experienced homelessness at some point in their life describe themselves as a homeless person. There's a big movement in the deaf community to celebrate deaf culture, sign language, and to see deafness not as a disability, but as any other part of a person's identity. So people often prefer deaf person to person with hearing loss. Using identity first language doesn't mean using dirty or offensive language. It is a different approach to what phrasing is most empowering. According to a study done by Kenny et al., the term autistic was endorsed by a large percentage of autistic adults, family members, friends, and parents, but by considerably fewer professionals. Person with autism was endorsed by almost half of professionals, but by fewer autistic adults and parents. We observed a similar trend in our research, in which individuals with mental illness or autism preferred to identify with their condition, while professionals such as the CDC advocated for person-first language. This difference in language preference is also echoed in the study by Jammers et al., who argue that there is no one correct way to build and maintain a positive identity. Similarly, there is no one correct way to refer to people with autism, mental illness, homelessness, or autistic, mentally ill, homeless people. So what do we advise that you say? As a basic rule, default to the standards set by the CDC and try to use person-first language. If you know someone who has a mental illness, a developmental difference, or is experiencing homelessness, and you feel comfortable enough to ask them what language they prefer you use, do that. If you don't feel comfortable asking, try mirroring the language that the person uses to talk about themselves and their condition, whether that be person first, identity first, or a mixture of the two. The language that we use matters. For me, saying people experiencing homelessness makes me focus on that person's humanity first instead of their condition. The noticeable difference from mainstream language often inspires others to reflect on their perspectives as well. At the same time, embracing identity-first language eliminates the stigma that surrounds conditions. Instead of assuming that the person's condition is a negative aspect of their identity, when it may be something that they fully embrace as simply a part of who they are. Both person-first and identity-first language proponents are trying to get at the idea that the people with these conditions are defined by so many things beyond what can be captured in one label. While a condition is a facet of someone's identity, it is not their entire identity. Whatever language we choose to use should be employed as a way to celebrate the complexities of each individual and champion our shared humanity.
Okay, so we'll stop it here. And I need to reshare, stop share, and reshare the PowerPoint. We were here. Okay, so that's where we were. We are returning to take a moment to reflect on what we've learned today, what your thoughts are, what you know now. So we're going to take a little bit of time here. We took 3 minutes to write what we knew before we came in. I imagine there's a lot more to jot down now. We're going to take a good 6 or 7 minutes, let's say 7 minutes to write, and then we're going to open it up for questions and discussion. So I will see you back here in 7 minutes. Stay in the Zoom meeting. I'm going to mute myself. I'll be back in 7 minutes. Okay, so we are back. And we're moving to questions, answers, discussion. I'm going to stop the share and open it up for anything that you would like to ask questions about or discuss from what we've talked about. If there are questions about the logistics, about how the study group works, hold them because that's our next portion. About the material regarding neurodiversity and models of disability, wide open. And we can ask questions a few different ways. You can use the chat and type a question. You can use the Q&A function and type a question. You can also raise your virtual hand, and then I can find you in the participants list and get your audio going. And I might even be able to get your video going so that you can ask a question. So I'm leaving it wide open and giving you some time, because some of you may be typing, for any questions that you might have, or anything that you'd like to discuss. We are quiet. You have truly been challenged today. Can you indicate in the chat, am I saying it right, Leela or Layla, if you would be okay talking a little bit, if I give you audio and video to do that, about how you've been challenged in one way that you've been challenged? If not, that's cool. I'm asking your permission. Yes. Okay, so what I have to do, we get to walk me through this, is go to the participants list and find you. Okay. I can allow you to talk. So go ahead. You should be able to speak now. Here you go. Oh, let me unmute you and then you're really good. Oh, you have to unmute yourself. Layla, if you there we go. Go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to say that I'm a music therapist and a music educator. Mm-hmm. And I guess there have been some perspectives, maybe learned perspectives, I guess, about neurodiversity. And I guess that I have looked at neurodiversity as needing to be cured. And I just really feel challenged to change that perspective. I don't think I really feel that way at heart, because I have people within my own life that are neurodiverse, and I don't think I ever looked at them that way, but because I have clients, maybe I've had that thought process before about curing someone.
I absolutely understand that. And the roots of music therapy align to some degree with the medical model, because it's using music as an intervention to make changes. I wouldn't call it curing necessarily, but it is to address challenges, right? And to alleviate the challenges. So I can see that. And I think your work is at the nexus of that and music education. And there are opportunities to bring this perspective to both, for sure. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I am going to figure out what I do next for you. Hang on, I have to find you in the list. That, beautiful. Wishing this information was more available and taught to all teachers, says Heidi in the chat. I feel like it's been difficult to share some of this with her coworkers. I've gone deep down the rabbit hole of neurodiversity through a very close autistic friend who is also a teacher. Heidi, I hear you. And I think there needs to be, this is why Thomas Armstrong's book is so good, and recommend it to your colleagues because it's excellent. But the education profession has a ways to go as a whole in this regard. It really does. And you heard Stephen Tonti talk about his school versus his roommate's school, right? There's a lot of challenge here in the education profession, and it's tricky. So as I was saying with Layla about intervention, for some neurodivergent diagnoses and disabilities, education has been the forum where, for lack of a better phrase, interventions have been actualized, right? So you have a student with ADHD and there is an IEP and there are interventions and there's a medical model behind all of that, right? So, and that it prevails throughout education. So there's a lot here. We aren't there yet as a profession. If my institute can help with that, we'd be happy to. I think Armstrong's book might be a good place to start if you haven't gotten them reading that already. In the Q&A, Moniz, several books. Okay, so I can give the answers in the chat, I think is the way to do that. And I think there's other questions about books. Tracy wants to know about the Armstrong book. Okay, first of all, you're all gonna get the slides. It's in the slides. So we can relax a little bit because it's going to be in the slides, and the slides are coming to you by email on Monday. But I can also give you names of books. So Judy Singer, her book is God, what's the proper title for just the book? So the chapter is Why Can't You Be Normal? I think it's just called Neurodiversity, the Birth of an Idea. Yeah. That book is hard to get your hands on, but it exists. Thomas Armstrong has written several books, but the one I'm talking about is called Neurodiversity, Unleashing the Power of Your Differently Wired Brain. So those are the two that I spoke about. Okay, just making sure. Melissa, thanks for breaking some thoughts today. Now I have so many ideas because I want to do something about it and feel the responsibility as an arts educator. Good. I realize we're on our way to making a change. We definitely have to do more in the place we are, attending to the needs of the context. 100%. And you write that you're feeling motivated. I'm pleased to hear that, Melissa. That's great. There's work to be done. And starting, look, if a whole lot of us start local, that's a huge change. Add that all up. That's a huge change. And that's where we can exert real influence. Sophie, just this morning, I was reading an ASL group I am part of online about the reasons that many deaf people do not like or want cochlear implants. Challenging thing. I knew that deaf culture is very strong and people feel very connected to and proud of that identity, but I was not aware that people who do choose to get cochlear implants for themselves or their children feel subsequently excluded from deaf culture or lose friends because of it. You are correct. There's a lot of complications and dynamics there. An interesting connection about the idea of diagnoses not needing to be fixed. So there is definitely in the deaf community a strong proponent for not trying to quote unquote fix deafness. Absolutely. I'm glad that that resonated with you and that you see that elsewhere. Fantastic. Other comments, questions, things you want to talk about, know more about? We will soon transition to logistics. We will probably finish early and there is nothing wrong with that. But I want to give you a little time because if you're typing, it takes time. So I'm going to wait a little bit and we'll see where we're headed. Yeah, we're good. Cody, let me get to it. I have worked as a deaf music educator and it's a tricky and hard conversation to be held. I love ASL and its beautiful deaf culture. Thank you for that. Absolutely. There is a wonderful book, speaking of books, by Kelly Charette, and I'm going to look it up right now so I give you the right title. Hang on. I'm outside of Zoom for one moment, but I want to get you her book because it's good. And it is about hang on. Creative Miracles. Here's the link to the book. Here's the Amazon link to the book. It's called Creative Miracles, A Practitioner's Guide to Adaptive Music Instruction. And Kelly Charette, the author, is local in New England and has done a lot of work teaching deaf students music. So that's Kelly Charette's book right there. I recommend that to all of you. She's wonderful. Kayla, I don't have a question, but wanted to thank you for this experience. You're most welcome. I've been looking for a way to bridge my love of music and desire to reach all students as a sibling of disability. I really feel like this is what I'm looking for years. Oh, that's lovely to hear. I'm glad to hear it. And we're just getting started. So that's good too. Thank you, Kayla. That's wonderful. It's the reason we do this. There is a need and there are lots of people excited to do the work. I'm pleased that you're excited to keep going. Ronit, if I'm pronouncing you correctly. You're in music therapy and a music preschool teacher. You enjoy the information and get the support. That's fantastic. I love the crossovers. You know, music education and music therapy share many, many fabulous things in that Venn diagram. And then they each have their own fabulous uniquenesses. And I think there's a lot of mutual informing that can happen that can be really exciting. I'm fortunate at Berkeley, we have a great, fantastic music therapy department. And I'm in very close collaboration with several of the faculty members and the chair. We do a lot of things together and I have a lot of respect for those students. We also have a number of students who major in both music therapy and music education. It's a time-consuming track with all the practicum for both, but people do it. And it's pretty amazing. And I think there's a nice relationship there. I think people get caught up in silos and turf unnecessarily. We need to remember why we do this work. We do this for music to make the world a better place, to give people access to it, to improve their lives in some way, right? Music is a miraculous thing that humans do, and we want more humans to have more of it. So rather than trying to own a silo, can't we just focus on the why, right? At the end of soapbox. Say it again louder in the back. We try. I won't repeat myself, but that is what a bit of a soapbox. I feel like let me go back to our previous share, because I think there's an end slide. Here's some resources, including a resource list document. You're going to get the slides. And here's my contact information. You're going to get the slides. I'm going to stop this share. We've got someone in the chat. Yes, I agreed. I'm now going to transition to logistics for us. So we've embarked on this adventure together. What does it mean? What in the world am I supposed to do? How does this work? Etc. So we're going to answer all those questions. And I have yet another PowerPoint. Let me pull that up so it's top of mind on the computer. That way we can all see it. And it is here. And it goes there. Okay, so, whoops. We don't want to go there. We want to go back to Zoom. And we're sharing our screen. And we're going here. Okay, so this is the study group logistics presentation. It's short. And before we go there, there's something in the chat. Ronit did all their undergraduate work with autism and special needs, and they work with parents as part of the therapy so they can see the positive process for kids' musical abilities and success. That's great that parents are such an integral part of your work. That's fascinating. No need to apologize around typing. That's fascinating and important. Families are an enormous resource, and parents in particular know their children better than anybody else. Study group logistics, here we go. So say this 10 times fast. This is the synchronous session schedule. Oh, I did it. That's great. So this is not news to you. You've all seen this, but it's all on one slide, and you're going to have these slides too. So this is when the synchronous sessions happen. You don't have to be synchronous, but here is the plan. So today is April 16th in the morning, Boston time. I did the big picture strategies. We just did neurodiversity. Next week, April 23rd, we're going to have chorus and band 101 in the morning, Boston time, chorus and band 102 in the afternoon. Really interesting work that my colleagues Andy Clark and Shana Pistilli are doing. I'm excited for them to share it with you. On April 30th, we focus on general music and art with a 101 session and a 102 session in each. Nadia Castagna-Morin and Kayla McLaughlin are our presenters. And they have wonderful work to share, and it will be participatory. You'll have a good time. On May 7th, we have a 101 and a 102 on technology. And then we have a guitar class segment and a drums and percussion segment. And our presenters are Tomas Marquez, Sarah Fard, and Gretchen Harry, all of whom have great work to share with you. On May 14th, my partner in crime, Vicky LaRiccia, is spending the full day with you, pulling what I did today. She'll do differentiation of instruction 101 and behavior management 101, and then she'll do differentiation of instruction 102 and behavior management 102. Vicky is a special educator and a musician, and one of the best teachers I know. Those sessions will be really informative. And then on the 21st is project day, where Vicky and I are involved, and don't worry, we're about to explain what the projects are. So that's our schedule for your records. These sessions are all being video recorded, and I will be sending them out no later than sometime on Monday. It takes a while for Zoom to process lengthy webinar recordings. So saying Monday, I'm pretty sure they'll all be ready. You will get an email with links so that you can watch them from the Zoom system. In addition, after the study group is complete, we will be having these videos on our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to access them there as well. So on Monday, you're going to get an email with a link to the recording. You're also going to get some other things, and we're going to talk about those in terms of participation requirements. So there are lots of ways to participate in the study group. You can come to sessions, and you can choose to come to level 1, you can choose to come to level 2, you can choose to come to both. You can come spotty, you can be synchronous, you can be asynchronous, to as much or as little as you want. If you want a certificate of participation, you must meet the following requirements. You must attend 18 hours of sessions, which is 6 3-hour sessions. Those 6 3-hour sessions can all be level 1. They can all be level 2. They can be a mixture of both. Doesn't matter. They can be synchronous or asynchronous or a mixture of both. Doesn't matter. So you got to go to 18 hours of sessions. That's really the first 3 bullets. Then you also have to do what's called between session engagement. So another thing that's coming out in the email to all of you on Monday is a link to a Google document where you will respond, if you wish, to a reflection prompt based on what we did today. So you'll respond in there, and then I will actually respond to you in the document. So that between session engagement is required for all of them. I think we do 5 of them because there are 6 sessions. So there are 5 betweens. And then if you want full participation, you must create and present a project. And we're about to talk about what that involves. And then the certificates of participation will go out to everyone after all the sessions have taken place and with a lag time, so that asynchronous people who need time to catch up will be able to have time. So we finish on May 21st. I'm thinking late June is the earliest we'd get those certificates out, but they will go out. So what, pray tell, is a project? A project is an application of some aspect of what you learn in any of these sessions to your own teaching situation. You might choose to create curriculum. You might choose to design some activities. You might choose to develop some modifications or adaptations. You might choose to develop some assessments. You might choose to take some new approaches and try them and document what you notice. You might choose to do a case study of an individual student or a class where you try something new. The list could keep going. You get the idea. Lots of different things. They are works in progress. We have 6 weeks together. I am not expecting you to change the world in 6 weeks. I am not expecting you to conduct a capital R research project and write a research paper in 6 weeks. No. These are, you're taking something, you're trying it, and you're reporting on how it went, right? This is because we want to make this relevant for your teaching. And the projects, therefore, are a snapshot of what you've done to do this. You might have just applied it in 2 classes because that's all you had time to do. And that's fine. You might have tried it once, and that's fine. And we'll talk about what you might want to do in the future with it and what you learned even from that experience. So depending on the project, depends on the deliverable. You're going to document your project in some way. And that depends on what you're doing. If you're doing something that involves curriculum, you're going to create a curriculum document of some sort, a lesson plan or an activity plan or a unit plan. If you're going to be creating a social story, which is something we talked about in the session this morning, you will create that either with a slideshow or with a document and share the document that has that social story. So it really depends on what you apply, what you would create. We're going to have our projects presented on May 21st. Synchronous people will actually be able to talk under 10 minutes, and it might have to be under 5. Last year we had so many people, we had to spend 5 minutes or less presenting. 10 may be optimistic. We'll see how many synchronous folks we have, but you can present briefly, and Vicki and I will respond. If you cannot attend synchronously, but would like a response, you can send the project to me. There'll be a folder to submit them in. You can submit the project in the folder, and either we will present it on your behalf that day if there is time, or if time doesn't permit, Vicki and I will engage with it and give you feedback after the fact. So everybody's going to get feedback on their projects. It's just a question of how many we have to govern that and how the timing works. I encourage you to start thinking about your project now. We don't have a lot of time, right? So in this mythical email that does exist that you're going to get on Monday, it's going to have the link to the recordings for both levels. It's going to have between session engagement for both levels, and it's going to have a document for anyone, no matter how they're participating, to put their ideas for their project, and I will respond to those. If someone's trying to bite off too much, I'm going to say, look, we only have 6 weeks. So you're not going to try 6 strategies. Maybe you'll try 1. You get the idea. Or if someone feels like they're not doing enough, that never happens. Most people are too ambitious. So if you're too ambitious, I'm going to wind you back to something that's the right size for, my goodness, we only have 6 weeks together. So that will be happening, and you'll receive that in the email as well. What questions do we have about logistics? I'm stopping the share, and I'm open for the chat or for raised hands. What questions do we have? I will be shocked if there are no questions. I'm going to keep waiting. If one is attending both levels and completes 2 projects. So most people only make 1 project. If you actually did 36 hours of sessions and completed 2 projects, you can get certificate, two certificates of participation. Remember that what we can provide is only Massachusetts professional development points. We cannot provide things for other states or other countries, so you'll have to investigate whether that's something that you can transfer in. But if someone really did, and in 6 years, well, 5 years up till now, this has never happened, Layla. You may be an exception. No one's ever done 36 hours and done 2 projects. Is it possible? Sure. You would be blazing a trail. Do we have to send the presentation and the document before May 21st? So there'll be a place to upload the projects. Yeah, I have to have custody of them before the session because they all have to come from my screen. So the answer is yes. That's Melissa's question. They have to be sent to me before the 21st, even if it's, you know, the night before, but before the 21st in the folder, because I'll be the one sharing the screen from my computer. Other questions? Give it a little more time. We are early. It is all good. We'll be ending shortly, but I just want to make sure we take a moment for folks who might have questions. I'm going to give it a couple more minutes and then we're going to sign off. And you know how to reach me. If questions come up, send me an email. I'm happy to answer questions. Monday, a whole lot of things will hit your inbox. And then later in the week, the link will come. The links for the 2 sessions, the email with the links, probably Thursday or Friday. But Monday, the other stuff will come. Very exciting. I'm grateful for the opportunity to learn from me and everyone in the group as we continue our journey. Thank you, Tracy. I'm delighted to have you all here. It's a pleasure. We love doing these. And wait till you see these other presenters. They are rock stars, you will see. Andy and Shana are going to be a lot of fun next week. All right. I'm going to let us go. As I said, you have my email. You're going to get the slides. Don't forget, you're going to get the slides and the recording and you're getting a lot of things. They're all coming on Monday, except the link to next week's sessions, which will come later in the week. Thank you all for your time and attention. It has been a great pleasure exploring all of this with you. I wish you a wonderful rest of your afternoon, evening, morning, day, night. And thank you all. And I will see you next week. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.